Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jason DeCosta. Thank you for joining me today on my show called Consistent Preterism. I apologize in advance if you hear a snoring bulldog in the background, but he is passed out. Anyways, today I want to talk about the passage in Revelation chapter 21, which says that the Tabernacle of God is with men. Okay, actually, let me go over there just to make sure I worded that right. Yes, the Tabernacle of God is with men. Okay, so this passage comes up every now and again from the haters and the opposition. And they say, well, see, it says the tabernacle of God is with men. So the men here in focus have to be all men, right? It has to be the entire world. Well, today I want to kind of do a zip through Revelation and show you exactly who the men who are dwelling with God finally and tabernacling with God finally and being his people actually were, okay? Let's see here. The thing that I don't think people really understand about the Bible yet, and some do, and actually a lot do now, but people are coming into that understanding more and more, is that when terms like the word men are used, okay, this can very well mean, and which is the view that I hold, that this is sort of like a laser focus upon Israel. All right, so if this whole story is about Israel, and if Jesus only came for Israel, and if his death was for forgiveness of their sins and repentance for them, just like the Bible states, then the men in focus that are finally redeemed, right? The men in focus who are finally redeemed, having inherited that redemption, having inherited that promise, having inherited the eternal city, who are now here in the end of Revelation, which is the end of all this, them in their new city, in their new kingdom, dwelling with God, right? He would be their people. They would be his people. He would be their God. This is the fulfillment of all those promises that we see were exclusively for Israel, right? Throughout the last days gospel. And here they are in their new kingdom, their new city, and they're dwelling with God. So who do you think the men in focus here is? Right? I mean, pretty clear, right? Why would the men suddenly jump to a whole different group of people than the ones that were being gathered in and saved during the urgent last days gospel commission? It just doesn't make any sense. All right, so what I want to do, I want to read Revelation 21 where that portion comes from. I'm going to read a few other places in Revelation, circle right back around. And as the geeky Christian pastors say all over the country, buckle up because this is going to be a wild ride. All right, so we're going to start in Revelation 21, verse 1. It says, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away." Now, buckle up, because it's going to be a wild ride, okay? This is a wild wackadoodle passage, which is loaded with all sorts of stuff, right? So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I am going to try to give you some direction so we can move on to the other passages so that I can link the tabernacle of God is with men. If I try to go into all of this, it's going to end up turning into an hour-long teaching. Not a 315-segment teaching like Don Preston's 1 Corinthians 15 segment, but it would probably take me about an hour, and I don't want to do that. So let's just kind of breeze through it. He says, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first one had passed away." So he's getting a vision of all things made new. They're in this new creation. They're in this new city, this new Jerusalem. Then he says, "And there was no more sea." Now, we could go into that in grave detail. Obviously, those of you who have studied a little bit about the terminologies and whatnot know that the sea oftentimes represented the outer court, the Gentiles, right? And so a lot of people actually don't consider the other possibility of this statement here, which I think is a very good possibility. In this new heaven and new earth, right, that these ones are taken to, this new Jerusalem, there's no more sea, there's no more outer court, there's no more Gentiles, right? There's no more foreigners, there's no more outsiders, right? They're in their kingdom. So I'm not saying I'm settling there, and I'm not saying that actually exactly to do with that, but I'm saying it's a possibility. Right? Because think about it. Whose names are written on the New Jerusalem? Only the 12 tribes of Israel. So isn't that sort of like taking them and separating them from all that and just bringing them into their kingdom where only their names were written on it and there's no more sea, there's no more outsiders? It's possible, right? Then in verse 2 he says, I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, you know, these guys who want to argue the literal ascension of Jesus and the literal catching up of the saints to be like him at the end, they want to also cling to this passage in Revelation 21 and say, no, this is strict wooden literal. Strict wooden literal, right? New Jerusalem, the literal heavenly city, floated down out of heaven, right? Now, obviously there's problems because Revelation's an ultra vivid, ultra symbolic book. John actually says he uses symbols and signs in the beginning. So to take things super strict wooden literal here, it kind of gets you into trouble. These are sort of abstract, vague paintings and pictures of the same events, sort of, you know, being replayed in different ways. So you can't be too dogmatic about the details, but here we are, and they're taking this from this symbolic portion, they're taking this strict wooden literal, but they're ignoring about 20 New Testament passages about Jesus going up, the saints going up, him coming down for them being caught up, waiting for the upward call, ascending up into heaven, being carried up into heaven. You know, they take all these things, and they say, no, those aren't literal. But the coming down in Revelation 21, now that's literal, right? But they're ignoring that these accounts in the book of Acts and the Gospels and the letters written to real people, these aren't really symbolic things. I mean, you might be able to get away with some of the symbolism in the Gospels, but when it comes to the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 1, where Jesus ascends up into the heavens, right, you have eyewitnesses to that account. You have people standing there watching him ascend up into heaven, which makes this really, really, really hard to say was something other than what it was, right? There's no need to have witnesses there staring up into heaven, sort of frightened because they don't know where he's went. And then two men have to come and talk them off the ledge and say, hey, why are you looking up? The same Jesus that you saw go into those clouds will also come on them, right? So, you know, you can't spiritualize and symbolize that when it's in the book of Acts. These are acts of the apostles. These are actions that actually took place. This isn't so much of a symbolic book like the book of Revelation, as well as all the other letters like 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians, where Paul is talking about the literal changing in the twinkling of an eye, being caught up into the clouds, being gathered together with the dead, not preceding the dead. I mean, this is like very, very clear here, okay? But yet they want to hang their hat on this ultra-symbolic vision that John is getting, and that's all it was, is a vision of a holy city, right? Sort of like he's having this picture of this holy city, this New Jerusalem, sort of descending down, right? It's not meant to be taken literal, okay, like as it's really floating down. These are just pictures of things, right? He's having visions. And he sees it coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, how come they don't take that part literal, right? They take the New Jerusalem floating down out of heaven literal, but the prepared for a bride adorned for her husband, does that mean it was wearing a dress? Does that mean it had those red bottom heels on and one of those little things that slips up the old thigh? Oh, New Jerusalem, stop it. You're naughty. Right? But so they're not consistent, but they know this is symbolism, right? And then in verse 3, John hears a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. So now let's back up to Revelation 20 and catch this. Now, I'm the first to admit that not everything in Revelation is chronological, right? It bounces around. We know, for example, in Revelation chapter 7, we see a picture of the saints standing fully redeemed in their kingdoms, crying out, salvation belongs to our God. This is a victorious celebration. They're crying out in joy. They're dressed in white with palm branches, right? That's Revelation 7. Well, that's a picture of the fulfilled promise, them in the kingdom. Well, that doesn't happen until the city is destroyed. And the city is destroyed in what? Revelation 19, maybe? Revelation 20? Revelation 18, perhaps, in that area. So some 10 chapters after Revelation 7, we see the city is destroyed. But we know that the inheritance wouldn't come until that took place. So we have to be careful because this is not all chronological, but there are places that are chronological, portions, and you can pick those out and get a good idea for at least the borders, right? The fine details within may be a little tricky, but let's go to Revelation 20. Okay, in Revelation 20, verse 11 to 15 is the immediate event that takes place just prior to John seeing the new heaven and new earth and the New Jerusalem prepared as a bride and hearing a voice saying the tabernacle of God is with men. So just before that vision takes place, right? What takes place? The great white throne judgment, which is the last thing in the line of events before they enter into their promise. The great white throne judgment comes after the resurrection. The great white throne judgment comes after the destruction of the city. Okay, the great white throne judgment is sort of the final event in the spiritual realm, if you will, that would lead them into their respective destinations. So you see this great white throne judgment as the final event. And in verse 11 it says, "Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away. And there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire." So obviously we see this sort of final picture of the great white throne judgment. And they're rising up, they're standing before the throne, and they're about to be judged. Now, obviously, we know when this took place and we know who it took place with, right? Daniel chapter 12 speaks of the end where Israelites are raised. Daniel, your people will be raised, some to everlasting life, some to shame and contempt. So we know that this is all about Israel, right? Your people will awake from the dust of the earth and rise. Jesus told them that in the resurrection, they would sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So this whole resurrection idea and this standing before the throne being judged according to works was all about Israel, right? It never had anything to do with anyone else. And we know when it took place, right? Jesus told them in Matthew 16 that some of them standing there would not taste death until they saw the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And it would be at that time that he would, quote, judge each one according to their works. That's the same thing we find here in Revelation 20, which is the final event. He says he would come and judge each one according to their works, right? By the things which were written in the books. Well, the books tie back to the law because Paul says in Galatians 3 that cursed is everyone who does not continue to do all things which are written in the book. So the curse was the law, it was the books, and they would be judged according to their works, by the things which were written in the books. So they had these books that were going to be opened at the end of their days. But point is that this took place in that last generation. That's why they were in the last days. That's why the kingdom was at hand. That's why they were about to be judged according to their works. After the resurrection, they're standing before the throne, and this final event is about to take place, which then transfers them into that Revelation 21 picture where all things are made new. There's no more sea. They hear a voice saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them. They will be his people. He would be their God. And he will wipe away every tear, and there will be no more pain, death, nor sorrow, no more crying, for the former things have passed away." And what's funny is you try to get the inconsistent full pret to explain that because futurists want to know, like, hey, I have pain, I have sorrow, I cry, I die. What's going on here? You're saying I'm in this all things made new kingdom, right? But yet none of that's a reality for me. And they say, yeah, well, that doesn't mean what it really says. Let's see how we can get rid of this one, right? No. Okay, no. If you're going to explain things away, and if the Bible needed to be explained in such a way that made no logical sense whatsoever, then you might as well throw it in the trash, because what was God thinking, right? I mean, why would he write things like that if they weren't real, right? I mean, do you need to have this mind, this specific mind to understand them? You know, like people would say, oh, you need the Holy Spirit to understand it. Yeah, but the so-called Holy Spirit that everybody claims they have, disagrees on all this, right? You got 90% of Christians are futurists, so they don't believe that they're in that reality yet. They don't believe that they have no more death, no more pain, no more sorrow, no more tears. But then you have this small group of inconsistent full prets who say that their version of the Holy Spirit shows them that this is the case, that you already do have this stuff. So it's just a huge mess, right? Nobody's in agreement. So you can't use the whole, you need the Spirit to see it thing, because you all claim to have the Spirit and nobody sees it the same. Matter of fact, the futurists see it more like I see it. They just miss all the time statements, right? They kind of got it right in terms of the inheritance, right? This is a supernatural story and they get it, but the timing's way off. So they miss, and of course the relevance is way off too, because they think it's about them when it's really not. But the point here is that they enter into this new city where all things are made new. This is right after that great judgment, which was only that great throne judgment, which was only for Israel. Okay, they're the ones who were promised the resurrection and the judgment, and they had the hope and all this. Paul said the resurrection was the hope of the Father. They were the ones who were going to be raised in the resurrection. Other foreign pagan nations didn't have that same hope. Only Israel did. So here they are, they're raised, they're judged, and they enter in. The righteous enter into their promise, their new Jerusalem. And God is now dwelling with them. They shall be his people. He will be their God. Okay, now, we're going to come back to this, but I want to do a quick loop around Revelation. Okay, I hope most of you have followed me and you've heard my Revelation 7 work, my Revelation 14 stuff. And so this will be relatively quick, kind of breezing it over, but I'll try to be concise and also effective in that way. So in Revelation 7 verse 1, John sees the sealed of Israel. He says, after these things I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel was sealed. Then he goes on and he lists 12,000 from each tribe were sealed. So we know who the ones being sealed during that last day's gospel commission were, right? I mean, there's no 2 sealings of God. There's 1 sealing of God going on in the last days. And that single sealing that John refers to on the forehead here, okay, is only pertinent and relative to the 12 tribes of Israel. Those were the only ones being sealed. The 12 tribes of Israel were the only ones getting the mark on the forehead, the sealing of God. Okay? Then as we proceed in Revelation 7 in verse 9, John, so that what I just read to you, he heard, okay? He didn't see that, he heard it. Okay? Let's see. Yes, he heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. So he hears that number, and he knows who they are, right? They're the ones being sealed on the forehead. Then in verse 9, he looks and beholds a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne of the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the 4 living creatures, and fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, amen, blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Then one of the elders answered and saying to me, who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, sir, you know. So he said to me, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more nor thirst any more. The sun shall not make them faint, nor any heat. For the Lamb is in the midst of the throne. He will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of waters, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. All right, now, first in that first half, we see the 144,000. We know it's the Israelites. They're the ones being sealed. Then in verse 9, we get a picture of them in their promise, having inherited that promise. So the beginning is them being sealed for the day of redemption. And verse 9 forward is them in that promise, saying, salvation belongs to our God, crying out with joy, dressed in white with palm branches, singing, right? Then one of them asks and says, who are these arrayed in white robes? Where did they come from? And he answers and says, these are the ones who come out of the Great Tribulation. Well, when was the Great Tribulation? It was the last days. Jesus said, these days are the Great Tribulation. He said it flat out in the Gospels. Okay, like none is before, and refers back to Daniel and all this stuff. So the last days was the Great Tribulation. And these were the ones who came out from that Great Tribulation. So these were the ones who came out from that last days period. And they were before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. Okay, so here we go again. Where did the 12 tribes go? If these are a different group than the 12 tribes who were sealed in the beginning of this chapter, Revelation 7, then where are the 12 tribes? Because they're not included in this great multitude, right? According to you guys. They're not of all nations, tribes, tongues, and peoples. They can't be. They're a different group. So then where did they go? Did the 12 tribes not come out of that last day's great tribulation? Of course they did. And they came from all nations, tribes, tongues, and peoples. The great multitude is shown in heaven having received her promise. And that great multitude is the 12 tribes who were being sealed on the forehead in all nations where they were, including Jerusalem. So they're crying out with a loud voice, the 12 tribes, and they're obviously from all nations, tribes, tongues, and peoples, because this fulfills what Moses predicted, that in the latter days, Israelites would be all scattered abroad in all nations, and God would turn and have mercy upon them and remember the covenant that he made with their fathers. So that's Israelites out in the nations, paganized. God's remembering his covenant with Abraham, having mercy upon them and forgiving them. And like Paul says in Galatians 3, when he's telling them, look, if you're Christ, it's because you're Abraham's seed. You're an heir according to promise. There's neither Jew nor Greek. If you're Christ, it's because you're of your daddy Abraham, and you're an heir according to the promise. That's pulling from what Moses predicted, that God would remember the promise, the covenant promise that he made with their fathers. These are Israelites. Okay, so the great multitude that comes out from the tribulation and enters into the kingdom is indeed the 12 tribes, same group. But notice down in Revelation 7, verse 15, it says, therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. Ready? And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. Will dwell among them. Let's go back to Revelation 21. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. Let's go back to Revelation 7. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. Let's go back to Revelation 21. The tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell among them. So the men is the same in Revelation 21 as it is in Revelation 7. And the ones in Revelation 7 are the ones who came out from the Great Tribulation who were dwelling now with God. And obviously we know they're the 12 tribes of Israel. So I hope you see how I just weave that back in to show that it is absolutely the men in Revelation 21 whom God is dwelling with is absolutely the 12 tribes of Israel. Then if we bounce over to Revelation 14 real quick in the beginning, it says, then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written on their foreheads. That's the same 12 tribes I just showed you from Revelation 7 who were having the names written on their foreheads during the last days. These are the sealed. It says, I heard a voice from heaven like many voices of waters and like the voice of loud thunder, and I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. Ready? So what did we just read in Revelation 7, right? We read down at the bottom, we see in verse 9 that these ones are standing before the throne crying out, salvation belongs to our God. They're standing around the throne and they're worshiping God and singing to God, right? And these are the ones who came out from the Great Tribulation. But let's go back to Revelation 14. Right? This is going to blow your mind, right? Check this out. So in Revelation 7, this great multitude from all nations, tribes, and tongues is standing around the throne. Okay, look down in verse 9. It says, after these things I looked, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white with palm branches, crying out with a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels stood around the throne and the elders and the four living creatures and fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God. And they're singing this song, blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever. Then one of the elders answers and says, who are these ones? Where do they come from, these ones around the throne? And he says to him, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they've washed their robes in white. Therefore, they are before the throne, and they serve God day and night, and he dwells among them. Okay, now, so what do we see here? So we see in Revelation 7 that the great multitude from all nations, tribes, and tongues is around the throne, crying out, singing to God, worshiping God around the throne. Well, let's go to Revelation 14 and read that again. Now, remember those details. The great multitude from all nations is around the throne, crying out to God, singing, crying out to God and singing around the throne. So then in Revelation 14, John says in verse 1, then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having the name of his father written on the forehead. Okay, so here's the 12 tribes back in the picture again, right? In verse 2, it says, and I heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. So John is hearing a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters and the voice of loud thunder. Could this be them around the throne singing, right? Could it be? And then he says, and I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. Well, this is still music, right? And they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne. Oh, so here we go again. We have this group of people singing, right? A new song before the throne. He hears harps. He hears this voice from heaven like the voice of many waters. And then he says, they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders, right? So in Revelation 7, we saw down here that the angels all stood around the throne with the elders and the four living creatures, right? And they worshiped God and sang. So back to Revelation 14, we see that the elders, we see where was I? We see that the four living creatures and the elders are back in the picture with the 144K. That's interesting. And then he says, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being firstfruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. So what are we seeing here, folks? An amazing connection. In Revelation 14, the 144,000 are the 12 tribes of Israel. They have to be. They're the ones with the stamp on the forehead. They're in heaven. They're singing loud around the throne. They're all around the throne singing, crying out. They're with the four living creatures and the elders, and they're singing, right? And these are the ones who were redeemed from among men. Not all men, from among men, the 144,000. But if we go back to Revelation 7, we see that the great multitude from all nations were the ones standing around the throne, clothed in white, crying out and singing to God, saying salvation belongs to our God. These were the ones who were redeemed from among men, the great multitude from all nations. Do we understand this now? Are we starting to see this more clearly? What I essentially just did is I showed you that the 144,000 is obviously the 12 tribes of Israel. Nobody would deny that. I then showed you that the Revelation 14 shows that the 144,000 are the ones standing around the throne saying salvation belongs to our God and being redeemed from among men. And I linked that back to Revelation 7, which shows this same group, but defines them as a great multitude from all nations now. This same people is standing around the throne crying out salvation belongs to our God, and these are the ones who are redeemed from among men. These are the ones that are singing salvation belongs to our God. These are the ones who are saved. And they're all around the throne singing. And they're also, in both accounts, they're with the elders and the four living creatures. So the 144,000 is the great multitude. Okay, and guess what? The 144,000 in both places are the ones who, what? Dwelled with God. Once they were saved, once they had inherited their heaven, their promise. They were the ones dwelling with God. They were the ones with the Lamb in their midst. They were the ones who followed the Lamb. These were the ones being first fruits to God, meaning chosen to God, prized to God. And in their mouth was found no deceit. These were the ones that had no more pain, no more tears, no more death, no more sorrow. Okay, they were in God's midst. And And if we need something else to back it up, look at Revelation 5. Revelation 5, we see another picture of this new song in heaven. It says, and when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. So here's that picture again of music around the throne, each having a harp. They fell down, the 4 living creatures, the 24 elders. They fell down. They started singing a new song saying, quote, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and you have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Okay, so what is it saying in the new song? He's saying, you have redeemed us out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Well, remember in Revelation 14, it said only the 144,000 could learn the redemption song, the new song. And here it is in Revelation 5, describing what that new song in verse 9, and they sang a new song saying, you are worthy to take the scrolls and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Well, who do you think the redeemed us is there? Well, Revelation 14 says that the 144,000 were the ones redeemed from among men. The redemption was for Israel. Christ came only for Israel. And they were redeemed out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. The tribes, tongues, peoples, and nations weren't redeemed. The 144K, the chosen ones of Israel, were redeemed out from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Huge difference. So now that we've weaved that all together, let's go back to Revelation chapter 21. Let's read a few things here in the passage at question. I think I've already proved this dead in the water, and there's no coming back from it by what I just shared with you, right? I showed you that I linked everything back to the 144,000, and they were the ones who were dwelling with God in the New Jerusalem. Dwelling with God. They were the men. They were the ones redeemed from among men. Okay? But let's look here. It says in verse 1 of Revelation 21, now I saw a new heaven and new earth, for the first earth and first heaven had passed away, and there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. Okay, now ready. And he will dwell with them. Well, again, what did we just show you? What did I just show you in Revelation 7? The picture of the ones who came out from the great tribulation, clothed in white, singing before the throne. It says, he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. He's dwelling among the ones whom he redeemed. That's what Revelation 21 is speaking about. And if there's any doubt, the very next passage there says, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. So there's that whole, I will be your God and you will be my people, or you will be my people and I will be your God. God is saying that to these ones who are in the New Jerusalem, right? The ones who inherited the promise. He's telling them, I will be your God and you will be my people. Well, guess what? I'm going to only give you maybe a half dozen, but there are probably a few dozen examples of that statement in the Old Testament. And every single solitary time that statement is used, it is always referring to Israel. Always. I will be your God and you will be my people. You will be my people and I will be your God. As Exodus 6 verse 7 says this, speaking to Israel, I will take you as my own people and I will be your God. Jeremiah 24:7 says, I will give them, Israel, a heart to know me, that I am the Lord. They will be my people and I will be their God, for they will return to me with all their heart. Jeremiah 31 verse 1, at that time, declares the Lord, I will be the God of all the families of Israel and they will be my people. Do you see this repeated? Jeremiah 31:33. But this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and inscribe it in their hearts. And I will be their God and they will be my people. Jeremiah 32:38. They will be my people and I will be their God. Ezekiel 36:28. Then you will live in the land that I gave your forefathers and you will be my people and I will be your God. Hosea 2:23. And I will sow her for myself in the land and I will have compassion on no compassion. And I will say to those who called not my people, you are my people and I will be your God. That's still speaking of the scattered Israelites. Zechariah 13:9. This third I will bring on the This third I will bring through the fire. I will refine them like silver and test them like gold. They will call on my name and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God. Okay, so I just gave you 8 examples, and that's just some. All right, that's a remnant. But do you see how every single solitary time this phrase, I will be their God and they will be my people, is used in the Old Testament? It is always used to speak of Yahweh's relationship with Israel. That's it. So when you come to Revelation 21 and you see that those who inherited the New Jerusalem, who are now dwelling with God, and you see God make this final declaration that God himself will be with them and be their God and they will be his people, do you really think that sways away from what is established throughout the entirety of the Bible prior? Is it like the whole story is God using that phrase to depict his relationship with Israel, and then in the very end, in Revelation 21, God just changes that all up and now it's about all humanity? Or does this make more sense as a love story where God takes his people and brings them into the promise that he promised them from the start? And he is finally, truthfully, in truth, with no more threat, no more pain, no more sorrow, no more tears, no more death, is he truly finally their God and they are truly finally his people? And will they no longer have any pain or tears or death, for the former things would have finally passed away? Folks, I think you know what the answer is, and I think you know what makes most sense. I'm going to cut this one short in righteousness, as Dr. Wayne Critchfield says, and we'll be back another day, another time, another place, and another rhyme. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.